serve as co-chair of the Audit and Accountability Committee with my fellow colleague, Board Member Carol Beckerly. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today, we will be led by Mr. Kevin O'Connor from the Office of Internal Audit. Mr. O'Connor, could you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Ragland?
Here.
Ms. Beckerly?
Here.
Mr. Grant?
Here.
Mr. Vajon?
Here.
Mr. Jordan?
Here.
Ms. Adair? You do have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to the members of the committee for joining us today. I want to start by calling for a motion to approve the minutes from last month's Audit and Accountability Committee meeting. The minutes were sent to you in advance of the meeting. Are there any questions on the meeting minutes from last month? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from last month's meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Mr. O'Connor, please call the roll.
Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Vajon?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
And Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Item number one is committee operations. Mr. O'Connor, the floor is yours.
So for the amended A&A committee charter, we did send that information out for people to review, but we would like to table that at this meeting due to the charters being looked at by the board as a whole. So they want to align all the charters correctly. So we think it'd be best if we just table that and bring that back at next month's meeting and see where that stands.
Thank you, sir. I certainly would agree with that. Board Member Beckerly, I believe that that is your understanding of this process as well. So
Yes.
forgive me for jumping the gun on bringing this up today. I would entertain a motion to table.
Thank you. So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor, please call the roll.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Vajon?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Item number two, audit reports. Mr. O'Connor.
All righty, this is for the request for release of a report. We have completed the Office of Capital Improvements Operation Fix-It audit report, and Dion Brown will present that to the committee this afternoon. Dion,
Good afternoon, committee members. I would like
Good
to briefly,
afternoon.
thank you. I would like to briefly go over the Office of Capital Improvements Operation Fix-It audit report. But before I go over the report, I would like to acknowledge and thank Mr. Alex Trevino and his staff for their cooperation and professionalism throughout this audit engagement. We would also like to thank Mr. Odom and Ms. Marood for their cooperation and continued support of the audit process. With that being said, I would like to bring your attention to page 3 of this report, starting with the executive summary. Our office has recently completed an audit of Operation Fix-It. This general audit evaluated objectives selected by our office. We added one additional objective after the start of field work to address the risk posed by the current COVID-19 pandemic. Based on the results of our work, we identified areas where improvements can be made. Scrolling down a little bit. Overall, we reported 5 issues and 6 recommendations. The risk associated with those 5 issues are as follows: 3 high, 2 moderate. During the course of our audit, we made the Office of Capital Improvements Management aware of our issues and recommendations for improvement. Pages 4 through 6 of this report is a summary chart of the objectives and issues noted during this review. We will go over the issues rated high in the body of this report. So moving on to page 6, starting with the background section. The Director of Office of Capital Improvements oversees the office. Its mission is carried out by the construction contract manager, the Office of Real Estate and Shared Facility Supervisor, and 4 project managers. This organizational structure is depicted in Exhibit 1 on the next page. We have the organizational chart. We've also included the mission statement and vision statement for the Office of Capital Improvements. Moving on to page 8, starting with Operation Fix-It. In 2016, Columbus voters approved Issue 57, a property tax increase designed to fund district improvements. The district used part of that money to fund $125 million to fund Operation Fix-It. This 5-year initiative was designed to target deferred maintenance projects and staffing needs across the district. The Building Improvement Reference Guide in Appendix A provides detail regarding which schools have received which types of improvements. The district reported approximately $74.9 million in expenditures for Operation Fix-It since fiscal year 2017, as shown in Exhibit 2. Exhibit 3 details expenditures by project type, and Exhibit 4 is the status of Operation Fix-It projects as of June of 2020. Exhibit 4 can be found on page 9. I'd like to take a brief pause, Chair Ragland, to see if there are any questions before we go over the 3 high-rated issues in this report. Okay, hearing none, we'll start with issue 1. Insufficient procedures exist for the change order process, a risk rating of high. As part of determining the overall appropriateness of Operation Fix-It spending, we looked at change orders executed on Operation Fix-It contracts. Since most of the change orders increase the overall contract price, it is imperative that these contract amendments are made through an established change order process. Our review of the procedures relevant to the change order process noted incomplete or missing procedures. Exhibit 5 identifies which procedures were incomplete and or missing. Moving on to page 10 is the rest of Exhibit 5. Procedures help create proper governance structure and internal control framework for an organization. Lack of formally documented procedures may lead to insufficient and inconsistent change order analysis, along with improper or unjustified change order approval. For corresponding recommendation number 1, the Office of Capital Improvements should continue to update and refine its procedures to incorporate critical elements of the change order process. I will turn it over to Alex to speak to his management response, and we can address any questions that you may have regarding issue number 1.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Yes, welcome, Mr. Trevino.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm not going to read the response verbatim, but so certainly as Mr. Brown and his team brought forth their concerns, it did certainly highlight the fact that while we have a very standardized set of forms that we use for documenting our change orders, one thing that we did not have is really that set of written procedures that very clearly delineate how and when those forms should be filled out. And so we were largely, or have been largely, relying on our institutional knowledge. And so we agree with the recommendation to do some research, make sure we find those best practices, certainly from our partner organizations that are doing the same type of work, and to test and then train with those same procedures to make sure that our entire team, so that's including our district staff, our project managers largely, as well as our consultants, since they are part of that change order procedure, and then of course our contractors, who are usually the ones who are initiating those change orders.
Any questions or any other questions regarding issue 1?
Dion, this is Greg. Maybe it's for Mr. Trevino. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining. Is there a clear set of written procedures as to what needs to be followed, or is there some ambiguity in the change order process?
So I think what's lacking right now. So our forms start to our forms essentially direct the contractor teams what the backup information is, but within that there's certainly a lot of room for interpretation. So so every change order has a cover sheet. It's responsible for itemizing the total cost as well as any time impacts. It has a description. It also delineates all of the signature requirements that are required to approve that change order. Behind that change order, there is always a backup sheet. So that's going to give the contractor the basic information in terms of both material costs as well as labor costs. It's really anything after that that we don't have those clearly delineated procedures for. But I would say even for those, even for that secondary sheet, to have a more definitive list of instructions that tells precisely not only what we expect, but when we expect it. And then I don't want to jump ahead, but you're going to kind of see a recurring theme in many of these concerns that were brought forward that have to do with these procedures.
If I may, Chair Ragland,
Please.
do the procedure specify the dollar threshold or percentage of contract that needs to be documented?
They do. That's a great question. So those are some of the things that are well established in the change order. So we have change orders type A, B, C, and D, and those are all based on the dollar threshold and as well as time. So it's a different level of authority that's required based on what it is we're changing. Typically, it's going to be the dollar threshold that we're spending.
Okay. And then lastly, do the procedures specify based on the dollar threshold if the change order requires renegotiation with the vendor, or could it require, if it's significant, an entire new open contract bidding process?
I'm not sure if I totally understand the question.
So if the contract, maybe I'm jumping ahead and I'm trying to interpret the chart. So we had a variance of, it looks like a project 1001-2040 of $318,000. I guess my question is, did the procedure specify if it's $5,000, maybe it's pretty easy to do and just it goes forward. But if it's $250,000, does it have to get renegotiated with the vendor, or what type of process to make sure we have a fair and equitable amendment to the contract?
So it does not today. So there are no stipulations around that. One thing that I do want to point out is that, so for example, I know we very recently sent a quite large change order through to the board. And so one of the things I think we're going to want to clearly highlight in the change order procedures, I know the word change order oftentimes has a very negative connotation to it. It kind of implies that something was missed or there was an error. But I will tell you that some of the change order that I was just referencing was really a budget. It was a tactical way to manage our budget as we're working through the last of these projects and very carefully managing our budget. So in this particular case, I think the change order was about $360,000, and it was not an error on anybody's part. What it really reflects is the fact that we had one of our early projects for this summer where we were very carefully trying to manage the budget for the following two groups of projects coming behind it. And so we asked the contractor to price alternates for us, but we did not award those alternates at the time we awarded the contract because we needed to make sure we had sufficient budget to get the phases 2 and 3 right behind it awarded. So when we were able to award that last contract, and we could go through and look at our budget, and we were confident that we had enough money to be able to go back and afford those alternates. So in that case, we awarded alternates. And so the numbers at the surface look very suspicious in terms of adding work, but it was already competitively priced. So I do think one of the things we may want to be careful about is making sure that we find a way to define which change orders are truly those ones that are an error in scope where we needed to go in and fix something that we hadn't anticipated, versus something like that where it's really more of a budgeting maneuver.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you. We're doing an IT project in our risk management function, and we just talked at our steering committee the other day about we're going to increase scope for the right reasons, which wasn't part of the original contract, but we had to go through the same process to renegotiate the price, make sure it was properly approved and bid, because it was a substantial increase. Okay, thank you. That completes my questions, Chair Ragland.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
I have some questions.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
It seems to me that if you look at this chart, it's concluding that we didn't have any documentation that these things happened in the procedure description column. But I'm a little more concerned about if they actually happened or not. Like, for example, do we have independent estimates? Did we make sure the work didn't start on the change order until we finalize the, are there procedures that you're following that are just not being documented? Or
well, no, Rebecca, I would say it is largely the latter. So I don't believe it's that these things are not occurring. It's that we do not have that written set of procedures, and I'll certainly let the IA team chime in with. I don't want to put words in their mouth.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it came down to, is not having the written procedures in place to govern that process.
so to some extent, you know, if your procedures are okay and we just haven't documented it, then it seems to me that, you know, we just got to commit your procedures to writing. I don't even know, you know, and it doesn't hurt to figure out what best practices there are and all of that. But I guess I was just trying to get a sense of the lay of the land in terms of what's actually happening.
Yeah, Board Member Beckley, I would certainly love to take credit for the change order process that is in place, but I cannot do that. So it was one that was handed to me by our former construction manager as part of our facility master plan process. And in fact, we continue to use the same forms that were used on all of that work. So I think there is, to your point, there's a lot of institutional knowledge that has allowed us to successfully implement that change order process. What we're lacking is that written set of instructions that would help all of our teams make sure that we're being very consistent with that documentation.
Okay.
Mr. Trevino, I want to be very clear as we close out the Operation Fix It process. I know we're getting to the end there. We're making these changes, but the formalization of this change order process will become a systemic part of everything that you all are doing moving forward, correct? This isn't just for Operation Fix It and what it is that we're doing with Operation Fix It, but the corrections that you're making as a result of this audit will go across the board from here on out. Is that correct?
Yeah, Board Member Ragland, I would absolutely agree. So we're not looking to fix something just for Operation Fix It or whatever we brand the next version of this capital renewal work. It is something we would certainly plan to implement for all future projects.
Certainly, and I appreciate that because I know that I have been a stickler for this process for quite some time, and probably have nudged a few of you around some change orders in the past. But I think this type of clearing of grievances here, I guess, is what I would call it from my end. But then the corrective action that you all are engaged in putting in place is only going to be helpful when we're dealing with the public. If we're able to come back and show them, here's precisely what happened, here's how we have documented this, this is all public record, I think it really helps with transparency for not just, you all in your office, but for the board and for the superintendent as well. So thank you for that. Any other questions for, as Mr. Brown continues with his report?
I just want to clarify, you're saying that you're going to be implementing these processes, or you have already implemented a new documentation process? And has that been reviewed by everybody that's concerned to make sure that they're all in agreement that that's going to cure the documentation issue?
It has not yet been implemented. We are, our response is that we would intend to create these procedures and implement them in the future.
So are all the stakeholders going to be involved in that process? Because what you don't want to happen is that you feel like you've addressed the issue, and then you have the same issue come back up. Somebody else says they don't quite agree with, if it's sufficient or not. So I guess that is internal audit going to be involved in that process of reviewing those documentation.
Sure, and that
Yes.
would be my suggestion, Mr. Grant, is that we would get a report on the finalization of that here at the Audit and Accountability Committee meeting. It was my understanding that the process has not been completed as of yet, but once it is, that it would come back to us. Now, Mr. Brown, is that your understanding of the process as it moves forward?
Yes, sir. When the implementation date is complete, we will come in and complete a follow-up engagement for those corrective action responses.
And then that, to Mr. Grant's point, that information will come before this committee, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Grant?
Yes, it does.
Although I'd like to follow up on
Thank
that
you.
thought.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Co-Chair, please.
It seems like even before the corrective action measures have been finalized and brought to us, have the audit team be part of the discussion in terms of what procedures will work or don't work, and also decide, make sure that, because we're notorious as an organization to do things kind of in silos, like really be intentional about who needs to be part of this process. Like I would certainly want to suggest you should include our general counsel at some point in the process, but not just at the end to review, but to think about how to build it so that it really works.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's certainly within the independence rules that the audit team could discuss different controls that would work and let the business decide which one works the best for them. But I agree, it would be difficult to go off on our own. I mean, the audit team's in the best place, and they're the control experts, and their advice would be beneficial. And if we could chat about this later, but if the best action were that the audit team actually told them what controls to do, that's okay. The professional standards would just require the audit team to share with the committee that they did that, and we would just be aware of it. Again, that may be the most efficient way just to get somebody signed. I know the audit team knows that, and I would be comfortable with that as a committee member if that helps expedite the process.
Yeah, because I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, especially if everybody, including the audit team, is comfortable that a lot of these things were happening, they just weren't documented. But I think it's really important to loop in our general counsel, and I assume purchasing, to the extent that they have oversight over this. I'm still a little shaky on how that all interacts, but even it might be appropriate to include them if they hadn't been involved in the past. I'm sorry, this mask is driving me nuts, but so I'm having mask issues. But I just think that let's be intentional and also efficient, to Mr. Jordan's point.
Certainly, and I saw Mr. Brown nodding his head
Well,
through that process.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, sir, please continue.
I was just going to say, we've been in discussion and have talked to about a couple of issues and have planned to take a trip down to his office to go through some other items. So we will definitely be involved in that process.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions for Mr. Trevino at this point? If not, I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. Brown to continue.
Okay. Well, moving on to page 13, issue number 3. Page 13, issue number 3. There we go. Work resulting from Operation Fix-It from some Operation Fix-It contract orders started prior to the approval of change orders, a risk rating of high. Ideally, work resulting from change orders does not commence until the change order has been reviewed and approved. However, some change order work results from unforeseen circumstances or emergencies that impact a critical path schedule for a project. Our audit work revealed lack of adequate procedures governing emergency change orders on Operation Fix-It contracts. We also noted that that work commenced prior to the execution of a change order. The results of our testing indicated the following. For 18%, 17 of the 93 of the Operation Fix-It change orders tested, we determined that the work occurred before the execution and approval of the change order. For 12%, 11 of the 93 of the Operation Fix-It change orders tested, due to a lack of documentation, OIA could not determine whether the work occurred before the execution and approval of the change order. For the change orders where work started early, associated documentation was consistently lacking one or more of the following critical elements, which would allow for early start of work. An indication of whether the early start of work was a result of an emergency or undefinable scope, impact to the critical path schedule, approval, and authorization to start the work early. And moving on to page 14, pre-approved rates and or unit prices. Lack of formal documented procedures may lead to emergency or early start change orders that are insufficiently supported, exceed and not exceed contract amount, or result in schedule delays that neither the contractor nor the district agreed to, resulting in potential claims at the completion of the project. With corresponding recommendation number 3, Office of Capital Improvement should enhance and refine its procedures to include all critical elements of work starting prior to the change order execution and approval. I'll turn it over to Alex to discuss his management response.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So in short, so the response is that I expect that our resolution to the first issue is really going to resolve this one. And I see that I see this really kind of being that self-fulfilling prophecy. So when we can be more clear with our vendors about the expectations for change order pricing, they will be able to more quickly turn that information around to us. We'll also be able to more quickly review it, hopefully have fewer revisions required as a result of them providing that clear information. We can certainly at least reduce these numbers. And then I would expect those change order procedures would include some sort of provision for emergency work authorization.
Questions for Mr. Trevino or Mr. Brown? This is something that's really near and dear to me. When we hear from essentially those vendors that are not successful in obtaining bids from the district, it is this particular practice that that they point to. Oftentimes, we have change orders from corporations who are already within the building, and so they're doing things, and it makes perfect sense for us to say, well, you know, they're already there. Let's go ahead and let them keep doing it. But they already get started on it, and so we're not able to even bid it out because, well, they're already there. They've already begun the work, so let's just go ahead and change order it, and in round and round and round and round we go. And you know, as far as the public is concerned, it is this practice here that calls the entire bid process into question. And you know, for me, it would be my hope that you know, that we would be able to get this turned around and announced relatively quickly, because you know, this is something that I think has gone on for quite some time. I've heard about it for quite some time, and I think you know, when we get a lot of pushback from the community about our bid process, they point to this particular practice specifically. And so I really do hope that we take advantage of what we found here and do a very detailed job of correcting it.
Yes, I guess I would add, Chair Ragland, that a couple thoughts on the process for change orders. What one could be in the initial contract, a provision that would state to the vendor that should a change request be required, work initiated prior to approval, the vendor runs the risk of not being paid for that work. And certainly from our experience, that changed behavior
Right.
over the last couple of years. And then I think I would also add that, you know, I think Dion and the audit team can work with the business on Alex and team on. You also have to be careful of, if you set a dollar threshold for a change order, let's just say it's $50,000, just for example, that you don't want to see 3 or 4 of them at 2020 that avoids
Right.
that process and potentially have to rebid. So, and that may be a retrospective look that says, hey, this vendor's playing games, therefore, you know, we have to take a different action. But I think all those things, the audit team is in good position to provide some insights on.
Right. And back to Board Member Beckerly's point about including general counsel in this discussion as well. Because I think on the contract side, what Mr. Jordan has expressed is very important. The rubber meets the road when the checks get cut. And if you're facing doing it right or not getting paid, that really means a lot. Now, as a governmental entity, there may be, and I would imagine that there are some legal restrictions to that. And so Mr. Barnes and his team, I think that was very wise counsel from Ms. Beckerly to include them for this specific reason as well. So other questions, comments on this section?
Yes, well, it's hard when once an in-house counsel, always an in-house counsel. You want to have your hand in everything. I mean, well, to Mr. Jordan's point, that clause about, you know, work initiated prior to the finalization of a change order runs the risk of not getting paid. I would hope that that's understood and in our standard terms. And if it's not, we should make sure it's in it right away, because that's pretty basic. But I want to be clear about what this audit is saying and not saying. Because I think it's not suggesting that any change orders were inappropriate, or even that we were suggesting or doing something like Mr. Jordan suggested about 20-20-20 and really kind of being creative about getting under that 50,000 cutoff by having a bunch of smaller ones. It's just saying we didn't document what was happening. And I think that's an important question for Mr. Brown, because I just want to make sure that that's what we're saying.
Yep. All the change orders appeared to be appropriate, and we did test to make sure that the change orders were not, bid splitting or coming in.
Okay, so that's an important fact to make sure, and it might even be
We had
worth.
no issues with that testing. So,
and that might be worth a line in this report.
Okay.
Although I'm probably sure you don't want to go back and amend it, but
it's not a problem.
I just think that, the risk is still significant, and the lack of documentation is serious, but it's an entirely different beast than patterns of suspicious change orders or questionable.
Board Member Beckerly, if I may, so to the first question, so our contract does stipulate that vendors are working at their own risk if they are working without signed documentation, which in this case would be that change order.
I figured that. I figured that.
So that part is already included. And the one thing I would ask Mr. Brown as well, I'm not sure if it's included in this actual report, but Mr. Brown, what is our change order percentage tracking at right now as a % of our total spend?
The total spend, I don't have that information right offhand. I can get that information for you. I think, I can get that information for you.
I believe we are in about the 2% range.
I think it was 2.16.
Well, yeah, that was for the change.
Yes, that was the report, correct.
Yes.
Yep.
So I just pointed out because so our change order percentage is truly remarkably low, particularly given the magnitude and the complexity of some of these projects. So I don't say that to belittle the fact that there are clearly some issues that were pointed out, and we're certainly going to make sure we address those and improve. But overall, we're really quite proud of the very low change order percentage across these projects.
Yep, I apologize. That's an issue number 2. It's 2.16%.
Okay, so it's in there.
Yes. If there's no more questions, we can move on to issue 5 on page 15.
And before you do that, I just want to clarify with Board Member Beckerly, you're asking for the document itself to be amended. I just want you to kind of tuck that away when we call for a motion to move this to the board, because unless you're going to
Make an issue.
Provide that language to Mr. Brown. I want to make sure that we're able to move this to the board in a timely fashion. And so, be kind of thinking about what you'd like to see and maybe where. I think towards the end, if we can do a catch-all.
Well, or maybe it doesn't need to be in the report as much as I just wanted to make sure it was clear that that was what we were.
The intent.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, I just procedurally, I did not.
I get you.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Okay, got you. Mr. Brown, please proceed, sir.
Okay, starting with issue number 5 on page 15. Inconsistent rates were used on change order pricing review forms, a risk rating of high. The Office of Capital Improvements utilizes a change order pricing review form to allow the office to identify the need for change orders and manage them as they arise. The change order pricing review form also indicates the overhead charged by the contractor should not exceed 10%. Any profit realized by the contractor requires an addendum to the original contract, and the subcontractor markup should not exceed 10%. During our review of 121 change orders executed under Operation Fix-It contracts, we noted one vendor's rates on the change order pricing review forms were excessive compared to the rates on other vendors' change order pricing review form. These rates were also non-compliant with the contractual agreement entered into with the vendor. Moving on to page 16. We were unable to obtain evidence clearly referencing any documented justification for rates exceeding 10% for the vendor in question. Exhibit 8 details the rates that were charged in excess of 10%. These 22 instances of exceeding 10% for overhead profit and subcontractor markup cost the district more than $38,000. Scrolling down a little bit more, a little more. The lack of clearly referenced pricing sources and assumptions for change orders may result in inability for the district to obtain a fair price for change order work. This may lead to higher project costs, fraudulent activity, and possible budget overruns. With corresponding recommendations number 5 and 6, the Office of Capital Improvement should enhance and refine its change order procedures to include clearly referenced pricing rates, sources, and assumptions for change orders. Additionally, capital improvement staff should ensure the subcontractor markup, overhead, and profit are compliant with all contract provisions. And recommendation number 6, the Office of Capital Improvement should work with district legal counsel to determine whether the amounts that exceeded contract maximums can be recovered from the vendor. And I will let Alex speak to his management response.
So this is probably the most complex of the issues, and so I'll ask you to bear with me a little bit, and I'll try to walk you through what has occurred. And so this is certainly an issue that Mr. Brown brought to our attention, I think approximately in August, as they were working through their audit. So what we realized is that, as I mentioned earlier, so we certainly did not invent this change order procedure. And so we were carrying forward a change order procedure that was really designed for general contracting. So that very traditional design, bid, build, contract. So as we began to move much of our work, especially the HVAC work, into design build, we haven't had a tremendous number of change orders. And so when we did have change orders, we were using the same form that we had always used. And what we did not realize until Mr. Brown and his team went through and were auditing these change orders is that the form really was kind of forcing a round peg into a square hole. So when you see the comments about markup being limited to 10%, those are the rules for our general contracting contract. The rules for design build are really quite different. And as the name implies, design build, our design builders have more obligation than our general contractors do because they are both the architect and or engineer, as well as the builder, as well as essentially the construction manager for those projects. So when this issue was brought to our attention, we most certainly immediately contacted counsel. In this case, Board Member Beckerly, we do rely pretty extensively on our outside counsel in conjunction with Mr. Barnes. And so we had our outside counsel develop a new form for us that we had to test a couple times to make sure it was working for us the way we needed it to. And so we have, since that time, already implemented a new change order form. It does kind of get us part of the way there in terms of procedures. So it includes quite a few instructions to help our design builders understand when we do have a change order, what they need to provide to us, as well as what some of those limitations are. But the one thing I guess I do want to be clear about is, you see that $38,000 that Mr. Brown just referenced in terms of overcharging. So that is based on the general contracting provisions. It is not necessarily going to be the case under the design build provision. So I don't want to mix up the issues. So we have already design tested and implemented a new change order. Essentially, it's a workbook that provides all the backup information. We are already using that on any new change orders to make sure we don't continue to repeat this issue. But what we are now doing is working with our design builders to go back in time to look at these same change orders to see what that financial impact is. And right now, I don't have an answer for you. So that's something that we are already working on. And we will have more information, and we'll continue to work with the internal audit team to see what the what the true up is in terms of where we'll be financially. I think it's possible that the vendor may continue to owe the district money, but it is also possible that it may show the reverse of that. Because as I indicated earlier, the design build contract has different provisions in terms of what those contractors are permitted to charge as part of those change order processes. And so that's one we are working on right now, and that we hope to have to resolution by June.
Further questions from the committee
Just a quick thing that, the part that I liked best about what you just said, Mr. Trevino, is that you're working in conjunction with the Office of Internal Audit to sort this out. And I think that's really where the value of this entire process can be found. So I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you for the acknowledgement. I have to admit, had it not been for the audit, I'm not sure when we would have realized the flaw in our process. So it was certainly unfortunate, but I'm still also glad that we were able to catch it and address it and make sure we don't continue it.
Terrific.
Mr. Brown?
Well, Chair Ragland, if there are no other questions, this completes the review of Operation Fix-It audit report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My question is a general one. I know Alex had mentioned having something back on that last portion by June. What is the timeline for the completion of the formalized process?
So that,
So when will you have all of it done?
Mr. Brown, do you want me to answer that? Or so it is in the written responses. I just didn't verbalize it.
No, yeah, that's fine. You can go ahead and take that, Alex.
So we have asked for a year for full implementation with the real, so we do need some time to research. Like I said, this is not a new process, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So we would very much like to reach out to some of our peer organizations, which we've already started to do. The internal audit team has provided us with some examples. The reality is any significant volume of change orders that we are going to have are going to occur this summer as we're rolling out our last phase of Operation Fix-It projects. And I do not think we have adequate time to get those procedures drafted, tested, trained, and implemented in that time frame. So that is why we asked for the year. It'll essentially let us get the Operation Fix-It projects complete this summer, and we will have it in place before any future work would roll forward.
And a part of my concern, it would be my hope that, a year, it sounds good, but I mean, if there was a way that we could get this done a lot faster, I'm thinking very specifically about our facilities master plan process and what we are about to engage in with the public. It would be helpful if we were able to say to them that we've conducted an audit of this particular process. We formalize procedures that make certain that as we move forward, we're going to have, we're not going to see these types of issues crop up again. It would be helpful because, going out armed with that type of information that we can give to the public as opposed to just receiving their complaints again about the process itself, knowing that we've got, if we've got a process and we've got it in place. It's only going to build more trust for our process with them. And so I know that you've asked for a year, and I understand the justification behind that. If there's a way that we could expedite it, I think it only benefits everything that we have moving forward. I'd rather be talking about this in, with the formalized process in place in November of 21 than in, March or April of 22, understanding how things go. Just kind of put that in the back of your mind, please, Mr. Trevino. If we can get something done very quickly, I think the work that you are doing with internal audit on this will be helpful for our FMP moving forward, as well as some of the other things that we're going to have to engage in regarding our facilities. So the sooner the better would be my suggestion.
Thank you for the feedback.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chair Ragland.
And Mr. Trevino. I will, at this point, if there are no further questions, I will entertain a motion to move this report forward to the Board of Education.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. O'Connor, please call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Vajon?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Well done, gentlemen. All right. Our next section is activity and dashboard report, or wait, was that the last? Was that the only report that we needed to move forward?
That was the only report at this
Okay,
meeting.
yes, sir. I wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
Next, I have internal audit activity and dashboard report. Mr. O'Connor, the floor is yours, sir.
All righty. Let's see if I can find where I've put that. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, as always, as I go through it, if I tend to get too fast, feel free to slow me down or ask questions as we go. I'll start on page 3, which is the bar graph. And there we go. You'll notice just there are a couple changes from last month. The yellow column in the audits field has been increased by 1 due to the special education audit entering the field work stage as of January 31st. And the orange column in the audits portion has increased by 1 also due to the Operation Fix-It audit report being issued that we just voted on. Pages 5 and 6 are just same information, a little different field there or way to see it. And then 7, 8, and 9 are our Chevron pages. And again, all that information should reconcile. Page 10, deletions, additions, and adjustments to the audit plan. We don't have any at this meeting. Were there any questions on those pages? All righty, the outstanding issued page, number 12. We're pulling the issues directly from Teammate now, so there's no manual dashboard that we were having to reconcile. Dion Brown and Kevin Sanskowski really put a lot of work into getting all the issues into Teammate, and we reconciled my manual spreadsheets with the Teammate information. And once they all agreed, we decided to go exclusively with Teammate. Definitely makes the process more efficient. And you'll see the items ready for OIA review total 41, and 30 of those 41 recommendations have been assigned and are in differing stages of work. 14 of the 18 high-rated items are part of that assignment. The other 4 deal with things that would involve principals at schools. So we've tabled those, but just to let you know, we're focusing on those high risk areas to get those resolved and closed. So you might have a co-process owner that might be affected by an area treasurer and a principal. So those are the type of things that might show up in a high, and we've decided to table those until Dr. Dixon, we work with Dr. Dixon to get in there into the schools to clean those up. Page 13 is the external audit recommendations. One correction to this, and I apologize. I inadvertently left PDK curriculum audit on this sheet, and it's actually going to come off because the superintendent and her staff are going to work to follow up on that audit, and they will periodically present that information to the board. So I do apologize for that, but that going forward, that will not be there. Any questions on 12 and 13? I'm sorry, Mr. Jordan, you're muted.
Yep, sorry. Back on the high issues, if you would.
Yes.
Was there an aging? I don't think I recall seeing an aging of the open issues.
There is not an aging, but we can run that now in Teammate, and that will become part of presentations going forward.
That's great. I was just curious, anything that's past due, maybe more than a month or 2 would be something that would be, aging past due, 90 days, 180 days.
Okay. Yep.
Great, very helpful.
Presenting that. Yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then items for the current month. Slide 15 is just the different audit activities, professional development events we went to. One thing I did want to bring to your attention, we attended the coronavirus scams presentation put on by Central Ohio ACFE, and Steve Wiseman was the presenter, and he has a website called scamicide.com. And that lists the scam of the day and has updates on coronavirus scams. And we're periodically going out there to look at that type of stuff to see if anything of value can be taken from his website. But I know for the community members and people in the audit field, that's really good to see that type of information getting out there to everybody. The next page, some non-audit activities, communication. We did send our internal audit newsletter out on February 10th of this year. And I think everybody has seen that. So if you had any questions, I'd be willing to entertain those. It was focused on a theme of increased fraud awareness. And I can see giving the interest in risk management that probably that will be a theme coming forward at maybe our next one. And then project update on slide 18. We didn't have any updates since last month on any projects, procedures, or strategies going forward. And then slide 20, as always, is just our budget. So were there any questions on that dashboard? All righty. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. And this dashboard will be presented to the Board of Education along with the report at the next meeting, correct?
Yes, it will.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next on our agenda is item number 3, risk management. We have a major operations risk issue with our COO who is here, followed by a major financial and accountability risk with our CFO who is with us as well. So Mr. O'Connor, do you want to prep us with this, or do we go directly to Mr. Oldham?
The only thing I was going to say is these presentations are in accordance with our A&A calendar of activities that we have out there. So to just let everybody know, that's why these are coming to the
Right.
board or to the
Yes, sir.
committee. So if there's nothing else, we can just turn it over to Mr. Oldham to start.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Oldham. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Am I able to share my screen?
You are able to.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Audit and Accountability Committee, thank you for the opportunity to stand before you today. I'll be before you today to talk about operation risk. And the risk that I want to focus on today is risk mitigation that we've done from an operation standpoint addressing COVID-19. So the first thing I'd like to talk about, really just talk about business and operation. The objective of business operation is to provide timely and customer-driven support to ensure that the proper environment is provided while managing the efficient use of all resources. We shall demonstrate professional integrity in all situations and work to ensure that all students have a safe and adequate opportunity to learn. The business operating offices consist of 9 offices with 4 sub departments underneath those. We have buildings and grounds, capital improvements, custodial services, food service, outreach services, purchasing service with 3 shops under purchasing, which include print shop, warehouse delivery services, student activities, safety and security, transportation service, which also includes fleet services. To focus today, I was just going to give a quick overview of the summer work group that took place leading up from operation standpoint for preparing for COVID-19. And it says summer group. This actually started in the summer, but it carried on through and continue to be ongoing, very fluid process of preparing for addressing COVID-19. Transportation, meal services, maintenance, COVID-19, COVID prevention and cleaning process, and then also protective equipment supply that we prepared for the district. So the summer work group, Superintendent Dixon, Dr. Dixon had charged the organization with different work groups to work towards preparing for students to return through hybrid models or different models. And in operations, we had an operations work group which focused on preparing not only for schools, but also central office to come back to the facilities. And in this particular situation, we had partners from the outside to partner with us to work through these groups, which was district staff, we had labor partners, we had representatives and community partners. And our focus in this group were to focus on the safety, health of all students, staff, and any visitors. That was our priority and focus as we looked at these groups. And in this work, there were some changes in procedures and building layouts that we implemented to minimize the risk of building occupants and the public as they return to our facilities. Doing this work, we utilized different reference groups such as the Ohio Department of Education, CDC guidance, and information that's available from the Ohio Department of Health as well as Columbus Public Health to move forward and develop these plans. So in transportation, we implemented or enhanced our bus procedures. And in our bus procedures, we communicated and continue to communicate. Parents must conduct health assessments prior to students leaving home for the bus stops. And then health assessments based on the COVID-19 procedures that's listed out there of the different standards to look for. We also had asked parents and students to send the students to the bus stop wearing a mask and also to practice social distancing. And so with that being said, we also develop procedures for loading and unloading the bus, which we think is very critical to mitigate the risk. And students would board the bus as stated from the front to the back, when we start seating students from the back of the bus. The purpose and reason for that is so that reduces the number of times students are crossing paths as they enter the bus. And then also we would set students one student per seat. As you know, the CDC requirements are constantly changing, and so that can always change to more. And also we are allowed to, if students from the same family and household, to set two to a seat. But I just want to cover, in this protocol was change, 1 to seats. We also inform and encourage students not to change seats, setting the seats as they require to set in. And the reason for that is we also keep a student list of where students are sitting on the bus. And the purpose of that is we have to do any contact tracing. We know who was on the bus and where they were sitting. In the PM, we reverse the load process from the reverse order, still loading from the back to the front, but loading from the drop-off point. So who's ever dropped off first will be in the front of the bus. Those dropped out last are in the back of the bus. So, and again, we still practice social distance on the bus. Again, on the bus, as the students are riding the bus and making sure we're practicing safe adequate bus procedures on the bus, all students, including the bus driver, must wear a mask at all times where they're on the bus. If a student should arrive to the bus and do not have a mask, the bus driver will provide a mask to the student. All of our buses are equipped with masks to provide to the students. All of our buses have also been equipped with a automatic hand sanitizer dispenser when entering the bus, as well as the driver has a 12-ounce bottle as a backup on the bus as well. Students are encouraged and required to put hand sanitizer on their hands when they enter the bus, and also use hand sanitizer when they exit the bus. The bus itself is disinfected by the bus driver, common touch points between each run. And what that means, when we say each run, a bus driver may have what we call a tier 1, which is dropping off the middle and high school students. And then they disinfect between those runs. And then the tier 2 is the elementary students. So we disinfect between runs, as well as we disinfect the bus at the end of each shift, preparing for the next day. This is just a diagram showing, as I stated earlier, how we load the bus from the back to the front, and showing that we leave the first 2 seats empty to create a barrier for the driver, but also, should there be any overload, we have to be able to bring additional students if need be. This is just the unloading from the back to the front. And then we also have what we call lift buses, and this is just showing how we load the lift bus from the front to back. Also, we have a lift in the back to where we load the bus as well. And this is exiting the bus. We also, throughout the summer, but also in the virtual model, provide meals for our students. We, doing the virtual, 100% virtual, those are students as 100% virtual. We provided 5-day meal packs that could be picked up weekly on Wednesdays at 19 of our locations. And then also students will be able to pick up meals at whichever site was most convenient to them. So we picked 19 to strategically place throughout the district. And so students have the availability to pick up meals at those sites. The pickup is on Wednesday of each week. And then we prepare and give the students 5 meal packs that's shelf stable for a 5-day period, which carries them to the following week of pickup. Also for our hybrid learners, and our hybrid learners, students are provided breakfast and lunch on the days that they're in school. The days they're not in school, they're able to go to the meal sites and pick up a 5-day meal pack as well, which carries them through the next day. And for the group, on our hybrid learners, we're working in a cohort A and cohort B. Cohort A is students who go to school on Monday and Tuesday, and then they pick up their meal pack on Wednesday, carries them to the following week. And then cohort B is those students who attend school on Thursday and Friday. And these are our meal sites, the 19 meal sites. And we also constantly monitor this and make adjustments as needed based on needs and volumes. I would like to share, we started out with 18 meal sites and realized there was an opportunity at the Wedgwood area. We was able to add that meal site on and was able to get provide additional service to the families in that particular community, which has been very positive. So now we're up to 19 meal sites. In our maintenance operation, this is just a diagram of how with COVID, we're bringing in additional fresh air. This is one of our units where you see the different filters. We bring in indoor air quality in our sites. One of the things that we've done also for indoor air quality is we increase the flow of air intake starting at 5:30 a.m. And we run it also additional 2 hours past when school is let out. So we
Mr. Odom, hold on one moment, please. I've had some questions regarding your presentation over transportation and meal services. So before we get into maintenance and operations here,
yes, sir.
I'd like to stop for a quick second and allow for some questions on the transportation side as well as meal prep. I'm going to start with Board Member Beckerly.
Before we move on, I guess I'm just curious to know if we've identified any risks going forward in these areas. Like, are there things we should be aware of in terms of risks that you guys have identified in terms of the operation?
Just operation in general related to COVID-19.
Well, both, I guess. I mean, yes, certainly.
Well, thank you for the question. Quite naturally, with COVID-19, with all the operations departments and as well, the major risk we have is if staff have to go in quarantine. We have to make the adjustments of quarantine. It can impact our staff and impact. We're always forward thinking and looking at how we can address those matters. For example, in food service, we are always recruiting staff, additional staff, working with HR from that perspective. Our staffing patterns are sufficient as we speak to cover those areas. In transportation, we are going to a tier 1 and tier 2 model. We always have been looking at ways and strategizing to get students and staff back to school. We believe we have been working through that and have some good models to move forward. But again, in any, with the COVID, the unpredictability is if we have to go in quarantine in any of our staffing patterns.
So, I mean, because, you know, we've talked about this at the general board meetings, the concerns about available drivers. And I would imagine that continues to be a risk.
It's always a risk, but I think that's one aspect of it. I think what we're looking at as well is our ridership. And we're looking at who's riding, and we're able to looking at how we compress routes to create more opportunities. So again, I think drivers is one aspect of it, which is a number based on how we traditionally route. But in this time, it calls for different measures and being more creative and looking at how we do our routings based on traditionally we route based on eligibility. And we know we've done that, but now we got to look at and count on a regular basis who are actually riding the bus and compress routes based on that. So again, I would think it's a combination opposed to just saying we need X number, because that X number can always change. But again, there's always major risk from any operation if those numbers should go down. But I'm thinking that at this point, we look at riderships, We look at number of drivers, we look at call off, we look at all those things, and we marry those together to provide the best service practical for our students.
Okay.
And I know that I've seen several communications from our HR department and communications department around, the fact that we are seeking folks to join our team. And that information is going out almost daily. Is it your understanding that we could still use even more folks to come and join us at this time? I mean, are you saying, we are still hiring and we're hiring for a multitude of positions? Is that your understanding right now, Mr. Oldham?
That's correct. We are hiring, we're recruiting, and recruiting, and keep in mind in operation, though, it's ongoing. We're recruiting, and the best word of recruitment sometimes is word of mouth. I do know that HR is putting information out there, our team members are putting information out there. But again, that's a process. Right now, we have X number of staff that could support our routes. But again, I think the key to it is, keep in mind, when you talk about transportation, it's also how can we compress routes based on ridership as well. And we understand during this point of time, there's different models. We understand that families are using transportation a little bit differently. So again, I think it's a collaboration with our partners, collaboration with our families, and also working daily, looking at our numbers.
Can I add something, please?
Yes, ma'am, Madam
Yes,
Superintendent, welcome.
Thank you. I think a couple other mitigation risk strategies that we're looking at is not only do we have enough drivers, but our monitors too, because we put monitors on the buses to kind of help supervise our students, to make sure that our students are keeping their distance, their appropriate distance, especially our younger ones, even some of our older ones. Sometimes they like to kind of move around and possibly sit where they want to sit. So what we've done to mitigate that risk, is put extra monitors on the bus. So they have extra monitors on the bus, and also PPE. So if a student happened to, be at the bus stop and forget their mask, those masks would be there for our students. And also we want to make sure our drivers are protected. So we actually have specific PPE for our drivers. So, and hand sanitizer. So we put all of those things on our school bus. So when our students enter, we have the proper PPE for them. And then when they, when they exit the bus, our bus drivers are cleaning. So they have a strategy of cleaning the bus when kids are exiting, and so that we're keeping our buses clean for the next group of students when they're picked up in the afternoon. And then a last piece, we know that, we may not have, another strategy we did with making sure parents, we've asked our parents, I'm sorry, hold just a second.
Oh, poor you.
Excuse me, I'm eating popcorn.
Bless you.
So we've asked our parents if they want to take their students to school, because many parents may not want their students to ride the school bus. So another strategy, we said, well, if our parents feel more comfortable and that will allow us to transport more students and transport them safely, we have that as a strategy as well. So we have lots of strategies for mitigating proper risk when we're transporting our students. And we're making sure that we comply with the Columbus Public Health guidance and also our guidance to CDC to make sure that we have the proper strategies in place to reduce as much risk as possible. We know it's not foolproof, but we're wanting to make sure that we have as many of those strategies, and we're forming people. We have videos on the website, so parents are very familiar with what it will look like to ride the school bus, and making sure that our parents are working with us to inform our students of our new way of transporting, and making sure we have enough drivers. Like right now, we're okay, but if we need to hire additional drivers, we have been hiring drivers ongoing. We know around the state, people have been looking for drivers. But as Mr. Odom stated earlier, our ridership is down. So we believe that right now we have enough drivers for our current routes. Thank you. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you,
can I-
Dr. Dixon.
Mr. Ragland, can I get a point of clarification?
Yes, ma'am. Please, Madam Co-Chair, go for it.
I'm kind of wondering if we might have gotten our wires crossed, and maybe I'm the only one that got my wires crossed. But I was expecting that this was going to be a report about overall risk assessment for the operations organization. Or did we ask for a COVID report?
Oh, I'm not sure. I wasn't.
No, I wasn't asking you.
Okay, okay.
I was thinking maybe Mr. O'Connor or Mr. Ragland could clarify that one.
It was a major operational risk
Overview.
presentation, but given the high priority of COVID right now, with just moving people back into school, I think that was an appropriate presentation that they wanted to bring.
All right.
That's a great question. And I do believe, especially with today's announcement, and Dr. Dixon will be giving a little bit more detail on that at the end of our presentation from our treasurer today. I think it's more than appropriate that we get this information because we're going to have some new riders on the buses coming up here in the next couple of weeks here. And and this is all a new normal for all of us. For the first time, the Audit and Accountability Committee meeting is being conducted in a hybrid fashion. Even today, myself and Board Member Beckerly are on site. And our other committee members and staff are located in other areas all around the city. And this is something new and something for all of us to start getting used to. And no, I think it's very appropriate, and particularly with the age of some of our older buildings, our middle schools and high schools. I know that Maurice was prepared to start talking about airflow, and that is one of the questions that I have received consistently from the public, particularly in my neighborhood. How are you going to ensure that students that are going to schools like Walnut Ridge and Eastmore have the proper type of airflow in those older buildings? And you've got some real challenges there that I know your team has spent quite a bit of time addressing, Mr. Oldham, and so I don't want to lose that. So I'm not sure if we need to go back to the previous slide before you continue, but no, I think your question is appropriate, Madam Co-Chair, and I think the timing of the information that we're getting today is appropriate as well. Further questions from the committee before we move off of transportation and meal services and then get into the buildings and grounds side with Mr. Oldham leading us. Okay, Mr. Oldham, back to you, sir.
I'm trying to get back to the slide you spoke of, so apologize. Do you see my slide still, sir?
Yes, sir. That is it.
Okay. Let me get to it. I apologize. Okay. So what this was sharing here is just showing one of the things for mitigation it talks about is increasing the airflow of our facilities. And one of the things that we're doing to mitigate risk is increasing airflow by increasing more airflow starting at 5:30 a.m. And ending at 6:30 p.m. Airflow is always coming in, but we're increasing more airflow and monitoring at that particular time. Also, we have changed all of our filters out. At our facilities master plan buildings, we've increased our filters to MERV 14, even though the requirement is MERV 13. What the CDC says and the ASHRAE group says is to change to MERV filters 13 or better where they can fit. Keeping in mind, you have some systems where not filtered, those type of filters do not fit. And so we've changed those out in our facilities master plans to mirror 14 filters. We also have went through and changed out all the filters. Our building and grounds team have went through and checked our central air systems as well as our univent systems on the wall and to make sure they're working. Also, we monitor those through our integrated work management system, and we have integrators who monitor electronically those facilities master plan buildings to make sure the proper airflow is coming in. And then also what we do is also we've created any HVAC work order that comes in as a priority one, that we're addressing those as well. And we've also connected with partners outside contractors to be on standby should we need those. Those are some of the things for airflow that we've been working on, but then this is always ongoing because we're on weekly calls with Council of Great City Schools and others to see if anything new coming out. We're constantly following CDC guidelines and seeing if any new guidelines come out as well. So it's a work in progress, but I've been out in buildings. You mentioned about like the one at Ridge, actually happened to be one of the buildings I visited this afternoon, and airflow is working fine there. But again, it's an ongoing and very fluid process. I feel very confident in what we've done for our airflow. And then the other thing we've done in our buildings is we randomly went through checking for any type of Legionnaire testing for Legionnaire. We've disabled water fountains because it's a common touch point in our facilities. And we install plexiglass where appropriate to create a barrier at our schools, in our offices for staff as well. Some of the preventions for COVID-19, we're following Centers for Disease Control guidelines. We established schedules for performing cleaning in our facilities. We use EPA hospital grade disinfectant in our facilities. We focus on common touch points in our facilities throughout the day, which is door handles, light switches, desks, tables, chairs, all type of anything that's a common touch points. And we increase that disinfectant throughout the day. In our K-5 schools, we've augmented our staff with the staff in the middle and high school, custodians. But we constantly monitor that, our productivity of that, and that's so we can focus on common touch points. We do there's certain items we clean daily, and we do also a weekly disinfecting schedule as well. We've went out and we purchased electrostatic disinfect sprayers we use nightly. We've put those in all of our facilities. And what this disinfectant sprayer is a device, this device here, that's utilized to create an electrostatic spray, a disinfectant that you can spray throughout the facilities in the room, and it conducts to the surfaces on top and underneath and all the surfaces and increase the productivity of disinfect our areas. This is an enhancement. It doesn't do away with also the horizontal surface wiping that we do with our hospital grade disinfectant throughout the facilities. In every classroom, in every space we put in disinfectant wipes as well as gloves that's distributed throughout the facilities in every classroom throughout the district. We also have put sneeze guard barriers on the desk as well in the classroom, as well as socially distant the desks throughout the classrooms. Some of the other things that we did to mitigate risk is we've put signage throughout the facilities indicating 6 foot distance, exit here, please stay 6 foot. And then each building specific has designed their building for the flow of traffic specific to that building, because there's no cookie cutter approach, but the signage is a visual to constantly remind of the social distance. At each entry point and door, we have signs at each doorway that's remind guests and staff to wear masks. We have the CDC guidelines, the COVID checkpoint at every door point as a reminder for staff to do the checks of the 7 requirements. So we utilize this in every facility. The other thing is we have building readiness, and as I already stated, to make sure the building ready, we social distance the classroom. We install the barriers for the desks. Signage has been installed. Wipes, gloves, and has been distributed to classroom. There's hand sanitizer distributed to the classrooms, as well as all entry points throughout the facilities, as well as common points throughout the corridors, so we can always have hand sanitizers available. Also, we installed throughout the corridors automatic dispensing systems for hand sanitizers so that it decreases on the common touch points. And then as far as protective equipment, we've put a 90-day supply in every facilities. We have par levels established. Custodians will reorder when the par levels get low. We have a 90-day supply at our warehouse to replenish when needed as well. And some of those items we have for our protective equipment, we have hand sanitizers. We have 16-ounce bottles for the buildings. We have dispensers, automatic dispensers, as I stated, in the corridors. We have 12-ounce bottles for the buses. And the reason being is because of the volume. You want to reduce the volume with the automatic dispensers on the bus. We have face coverings for cloth masks for staff and disposable masks for students and visitors. We have N95 and K95 masks in our facility for specialized groups. We have gowns, face shields, and then each school will be supplied with bottled water to support students and staff for hydration. And then last but not least, we've developed organization, a school building readiness checklist where we go through and check to make sure these items are in place. And this is will be ongoing as a check. That also checks and balance. We have our custodian staff team will be doing inspections of the facility as well. Our head custodians at the building level will be doing inspection. But in this document here, we have teams going out and inspecting our buildings to make sure we're ready. And this is some of the things we have done in operation to mitigate getting ready for our students and staff to return. I went through it pretty quick. I was told I only had 10 minutes. I know I went over that. These are the things. There was more to share, but I just wanted to share that information.
No, that's fine, Mr. Alderman. I know that we have some further questions from the committee. The one thing I would like to share with you, because you've given this information to the Board of Education prior to this in some way, shape, or form. And one of the things that I've heard from the public consistently is that this standard regarding cleanliness that we have within our buildings, you mentioned the term hospital grade and some of the other things that we are doing on a day-to-day basis. Moving forward, this should be the standard. It should be our expectation that our buildings are cleaned at this level moving forward. I got accosted by a member of the public who told me very, very clearly, said, you know, you guys are doing all this extra stuff to get our buildings clean. Y'all better not go backwards. And I appreciated getting that comment as I was picking up my mustard in the grocery store. I appreciate the fact that our public and specifically our parents and our students are watching what it is that we have done. And they've said, well, listen, what we've proven through this process is that we are capable of doing these types of things for the betterment of our staff and our students. And we've got to make sure that this is something that, everybody is going to get vaccinated. We're going to return to some sense of what we expect to be normalcy. But regarding this cleanliness and the things that you've articulated here today, those are extraordinary. And I want those things to persist. I want our culture to change so that this is something that we are doing normally, so that our buildings are the cleanest that you can find here in the state of Ohio and in the nation, based on the work that all of our hardworking custodians and our teachers and our bus drivers and all of those folks that are engaged in this process are doing. And so I commend you for that. And I have seen the demonstration of those little ray guns that they are using to clean, and that's a pretty cool tool for our folks to be using. And I'm very pleased that we have that type of technology here to keep our students and our staff safe. I want to start back again with questions. Board Member Beckerly has a couple of questions here overall. Again, Board Member Beckerly, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, ma'am.
Well, I just am interested in knowing, Maurice, where do you see our highest risk in all of this? Because I think that's where we're going with this, was trying to identify the risk areas.
So again, I believe the highest risk is people, human capital. Again, there's something we can't control, individuals getting sick. And so our highest risk, but also mitigation, is human capital, that we're all following the protocols that's put in place, wearing masks where appropriate, washing hands, checking, doing a self-assessment prior to coming into our facilities. that's critical. But also, I think what's critically important on top of that is when we quarantine or have to quarantine, that we address that appropriately as well. So human capital for me would be the risk.
Thank you.
And Board Member Ragland, if I may, just to recap on something you said.
Please, sir.
Just so the public would know, we've been using hospital-grade disinfectant in Columbus City Schools since 2004. So it's not new, and I agree. And the other strategy that we teach is we exercise universal precaution, which means you treat everything as though it's potentially infectious.
Right.
If you go ahead and the protocol to use in an 8-step cleaning process, you should be disinfecting, sanitizing, as though it's potentially infectious. And the other approach you have to take is cleaning is different than disinfecting. And I think that's,
Yes, sir.
and so again, I just want to share but yes, I agree with you. We build upon it and not regress, but I just wanted to share, we have been using, when I came to the district in 2004, we transferred over to hospital grade disinfectant.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Odom. Mr. Jordan, I saw your hand. Did you have questions, sir?
Nope, I was just adjusting my speaker.
Got
I
it.
do have a question.
Yes, sir,
And
Mr. Grant.
we've been talking about primarily cleaning, but what happens in a case if you suspect somebody might be positive? I mean, are there testing ability on site, or how is that going to be handled?
So in our schools, we have also in our schools and on our checklist, a separation room has been identified. If a student or staff exhibit any of the COVID-19 symptoms while at site, they go to that identified separation room. And then if it's a student, their family members are notified to pick that student up. If that student cannot be picked up, we have protocols in place where we can contact the family members as well, and we can transport those students home following COVID-19 protocols.
And I think to add to that, we also have a partnership with Nationwide Children's Hospital and to begin COVID testing in the schools for our kindergarten through 5th graders beginning next week. So that would be done in partnership with our school nurses. So they've received the necessary training. And so we're excited about that partnership so that people can, I think it would give people a chance to feel even safer that they know
Right.
that testing could happen in the building. And then one of the other things that Mr. Odom stated earlier for our adults is really critical that they're monitoring themselves and their behaviors, right? Because they've not been in our spaces. So they want to tend to congregate perhaps. So we want to make sure that people are adhering to maintaining the 6-foot distances, wearing the mask, and the barriers. Those are 3 things that they state over and over that we have to make sure that we as adults and students, and then making sure those self-assessments, if you're not feeling well, if you have a temperature, then you should not come to the buildings. And same for our parents. So we understand that our parents may have, may not have a sitter or something, but we want to say if your child has a fever, it is just best to make sure that the child stays home at school, because if not, and they have some symptoms, then we do have, as Mr. Odom stated, a separation place. And we've kind of customized special transportation too for our students who may have COVID symptoms. So we have special transportation in which those students would be transported in a vehicle that would be sanitized before, sanitized after. The drivers will be in PPE, but we wanted to make sure that we had a means of getting students home safely if they were exhibiting any sort of symptoms.
Thank
All right,
you
I have
for
a
that.
couple of
Thank you.
things.
Thank you for that, Dr. Dixon. I want to make sure that we thank our friends at Nationwide Children's Hospital for their continued support of this district and our young people and their families. That is huge for us to be able to have the capability to test on site And it's more than a notion that they would step up and really provide that level of resources and the training for that change for us as a district. So shout out to them. Board Member Beckerly, you had some comments. I want to allow you to please proceed, ma'am.
This is a little less about the report that we're getting right now, but this is the first I heard about the special transport. That's wonderful. Great. And the second thing is the children's testing, the nationwide children's hospital testing going to be random, or is it when a child presents symptoms, or what are what's the plan?
Right now is when they present symptoms.
Okay.
And then we're moving because we're doing phasing it in.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Thank you.
That's really wonderful.
Thank you. And again, we wanted to, when we think about the risk, and it could be a risk even transporting students home, but we know, so we wanted to make sure that we had some a strategy for that, and Mr. Odom and the team put that together.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Odom? Mr. Odom, thank you for this presentation for us today and for all the hard work from you and your staff in getting us ready to do what we do best, and that's welcome our wonderful young people into our buildings. Thank you so much for all your hard work, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, next we will have the report from Mr. Bohort, our treasurer. Mr. Bohort?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Boy,
sir.
after that, you're going to be sorely disappointed in my report.
I doubt that.
But I won't keep you here till 5:30.
Okay, sir.
I'm going to, part of the presentation, I'm going to tag team with Catherine Mosier, because part of this will have to do with, a lot of this focuses on COVID-related issues, and one of those is some of the federal funding. So if I do this correctly, you should see our very brief outline of what we'll be speaking about. Some of the topics were mentioned to us by OIA to bring up, but in general, this really, what's kind of top of the mind awareness here is things having to do with COVID and its potential risks for my operations and district level funding issues and things like that. So we jotted some bullet points down here. There's some subtopics under here, and I might not go exactly in order, but I actually would begin with the second bullet point, because that really has nothing to do with COVID. But I was asked the question because there is a current vacancy in my office, and what are our plans, and what does succession planning present as a risk? And I would say it is, and it was noted, I think last August when I did my overall risk assessment, that succession planning is an issue. It did reach fruition with a retirement in December. I found, I did move a person up and promote them, but we do have a vacancy, and we're going through, we're at the very near end of the evaluation, or not the evaluation, the interview process. So we're real close to filling that spot. But really, succession planning for my office is coming into play with our overall discussions about our organization. As you know, budget department, at least a portion of it came over to me, and grant management went over to Catherine Mosier. And so we're taking this opportunity in my office to sit and kind of white page, blank page it. What are we doing? How are we organized? And part of that will be identifying risks related to holes in our succession planning and where we might need to fill in. So we recognize that succession planning is an issue. We have a pretty good idea of some vacancies that will be coming up in the next 2 to 3 years, and we'll have a means to discuss how those might be addressed. So that's kind of an update. It's an ongoing discussion about organization and planning. Relative to COVID, one of the first things that happened, as you well know, last year is we all had to react. How do we work without coming to work? And for my department, we had literally no time to plan a response, but we were pretty well positioned for that. We already had technology, laptops, for instance. We already had the know-how. How do we remotely log into our systems? And so we could move fairly seamlessly. I shouldn't say fairly seamlessly. I'm going to say seamlessly move from a on-site workforce to a remote workforce or a hybrid workforce. For the bulk of my staff, we've been on a staggered schedule for over a year. Some members working, pretty much 3 to 5 days a week, depending upon what the work required. Payroll staggers week to week. There's a payroll processing week, and then there's the actual week of payroll, so staffing can be different. The goal there was to be on site as needed to complete the work, but work remotely whenever you can to limit the contact, the interaction. Fairly quickly, all the PPE practices that Maurice spoke about, those were well implemented on my floor in terms of plexiglass and masks. Our cubicles were already socially distanced. Many of us had offices. So all of that was, quite frankly, Mike, our controller, quickly got plexiglass in place around our cubicles. So we were a pretty quick responder to things like that. And again, because we already had in place the ability to work remotely, because in the normal course of business, there are times when we needed to work remotely or have access to work remotely. Many of the administrative staff, even though we might be off on this thing called vacation, there's still a time when we needed to be able to log in. So while COVID may have expanded the need to work remotely, it wasn't really a new feature to us to have to be able to work remotely. So that went very, very well. So all in all, we're still in that on-site remote, avoid each other if you can kind of practice until such time as I think the community at large, business at large feels like it's time to come back on a full 5-day-a-week in-person basis. So that's kind of that, all under that succession planning, working remote couple of bullet points. On a funding level, you may well know that what COVID presented to us was a kind of an economic crisis. Businesses shut down. It impacted the state budget. It impacted people's jobs and their ability to pay their bills, one of which could have been their property taxes. The risk to us was the lack of collection of property taxes, but we didn't see that reach fruition. Second half property taxes during calendar year 20, although they delayed the payment date of that, so there was a timing issue for us. Collections came in at levels that we were expecting, so we've not seen any issue there. We're in the first half collection period thus far. Advances are coming in as we might expect them. So we won't know until March to see if there's anything in terms of taxes collected in calendar year 21, if there's going to be an impact, but we'll keep an eye out on that. Mitigation of something like this, I think we conservatively forecast our revenues. So to that extent, we can absorb a small percentage decline in revenues. There's not much else I can do in terms of mitigating the non-payment of property taxes here, other than through that conservative financing. And as you know, at FAC, we review the monthly financials, and we typically do run ahead of our revenue estimates. So that provides us that cushion. At the state level, you know that during fiscal 20, the state kind of forecasted a decline in their revenues, saw a decline in their revenues. They reduced our state funding for fiscal 20 and then kept that reduced level into fiscal 21. That amounted to right around $9.1 million, but because charter schools also were reduced, to us, our deduction was reduced a bit by a couple $1 million. So our net cash balance impact was about $7 million. we were able to survive that. We had reduced expenditures, overtime, substitute costs went down. So while there were revenue drops, we had some expenditure reductions as well. So all in all, I think we weathered that fairly well. Again, how do I mitigate the risk of state funding reductions? And you know what? That's a risk no matter whether we have a pandemic or we just have the General Assembly come into session. You know, there's a risk, period, right there, okay? And so how do we do that? Well, I flat forecast state revenue now. You know, we used to forecast increases. We stopped doing that because that was not a very successful way, that we never met those targets. So we flat forecast. So I'm in the throes of preparing the May update. We're in the middle of the biennial budget preparation and discussion for fiscal years 22 and 23. The governor's budget proposal is out. That proposal is to, I'm going to say, quote unquote, restore us to FY19 levels. And the only increase that we would see would be in student wellness and success funding. The governor's proposal calls for about $9 million there over the 2-year period. I will be testifying Monday on the Fair School Funding Bill, House Bill 1. So that's the way we mitigate, if you will, state funding issues, is to stay alert to legislation, testify and provide information relative to those legislations, state our case, and fight for you know, what is good for us from a legislative standpoint. Got our fingers crossed that we can have some impact on that. Good news is that just recently the governor restored about $5 million in funding for this fiscal year. Of course, charter schools saw an increase in their funding as well. And so net we'll see about $4 million bottom line. Again, on a $980 million budget, we need to be able to weather those through our planning. And I believe we do well doing that. Legislatively, there are other attacks on what I call attacks on school funding, specifically in legislation having to do with obviously you know, how they fund charters and vouchers. But right now, what we're preparing to defend against and testify against are some attacks on the Board of Tax Appeals process, an attempt to make it more onerous on us as we defend the tax base, as we do our job in making sure that all property is valued at fair market value so that everybody shares that tax burden equally. There's some movement afoot, and it happens every year in every General Assembly. The legislation is introduced to make it more onerous on boards of education to file those complaints and defend the tax duplicate. And we're working to you know, oppose those kind of efforts. You know, and that's what we do to mitigate that impact. So now the other piece of this is, how about all that state and federal pandemic related dollars that we're getting? You know, what are some of the risks around that? And again, much in our response, while COVID and the pandemic exacerbated some of these issues, they aren't issues that we weren't prepared for. So when you think about, wow, what's all this, and I might be stealing Catherine's comments, I don't know, but what has all this grant money that's flowed into us meant for us? Well, we handle grants. Our grant procedures are in place. And so from that risk standpoint, because there are restrictions on what you can spend the money on, both in terms of substance and timing, we deal with grants like that all the time. And so I'll turn it over to Catherine, and she can, you know, walk through, you know, briefly what we've seen and how we're handling it. And I will say this, a risk we have, and I hate to say that it didn't just dawn on me, but it dawned on me to remind you of this. One of the risks we have, and you'll hear about all the spending that we're doing with grant monies, and you hear about all the efforts that Maurice's team has gone through in terms of you know, the protections and the cleaning. And Board Member Ragland, you mentioned you want those buildings as clean going forward. Well, to the extent that some of that's extraordinary, and to the extent that some of that's being covered in the next couple of years by federal funding, I have a mantra: don't create recurring expenses out of non-recurring income. And then I modified that a little bit here lately to say, unless we plan for it. So Catherine has adopted that, and she knows full well that as we look at grant expenditures, really it should be non-recurring things, that it's our pandemic response. But if this is an opportunity to do something new that we want to put into place, we just need to know that we're going to pay for it for a couple of years out of federal money. And I have to factor that into my forecast. So that's a risk. Things that occurred today, will they carry on into the future? We need to be planned and be prepared for that, and be assured that that's going to have an impact on the general fund down the road. Okay, Catherine, up to you.
All right, I'm stealing your screen, Stan, for just a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Certainly, we understand and expect that the auditor of state and others will have an interest in how the district uses our CARES and ESSER funds. Just in general, in order to respond to the unique needs created as a result of the pandemic, Congress approved a number of new grants to support needs in schools, and the district has begun to receive funds to address the impact that COVID-19 has had and continues to have on our elementary and secondary schools. Earlier this month, I presented an overview of how we've used funds so far at the Finance and Accountability meeting, so I'm not going to go into all of the detail this time, but I think Board Member Ragland enjoyed that presentation so much. I'm going to go back periodically to update that committee as we go through the life cycle of these grants. But as Stan said, we have processes in the district in place for all grants. The federal grants team is experienced in this area. We have multiple staff members who collaborate on the application and the implementation. So knowledge does not rest with just one person. In the checks and balances, especially in the collaboration as Stan described, is the responsibility of the grants team and the treasurer's office. So I do think that that helps us to mitigate some risks. But specific to CARES, we will be continually monitoring these three areas as we go forward. We need to ensure, obviously, that the expenditures incurred are due to the public health emergency, that they were not accounted for in a previously approved budget. This one's easy, quite frankly. We were not planning for a pandemic when we planned the budget. Therefore, the expenses were not accounted for in the previous budget. And then, of course, as with all grants, that the expenses occurred in the time period that is allowed. In addition to those areas, though, we are also looking at some other considerations. Again, will they help us to prevent, prepare for, respond to the pandemic? Are they allowable? Is it reasonable and necessary? Does it promote equity? And of course, we've had a lot of conversation in the district around this area. And so I'm actually quite excited that some of these funds are going to let us jumpstart some of that work that is long overdue. Just in terms of mitigating risks, I don't think you would be surprised to know that there are processes in place, such as for these funds, anytime a requester attempts to enter a requisition, they have to identify one of the 12 allowable areas of the grant. We know that as we go through the next couple of months, there will continue to be events that pop up that we did not plan for. And therefore, while we plan, we must also have structures, and I think we've come a long way there in being adaptable In other words, if something comes up and we need to adjust our plan, we work with ODE to make those adjustments. We're not able to go forward with adjusting a budget without that approval at the state level. And so that, again, helps us to mitigate risks. All of the documentation of the application, of course, sits in the state finance system, in what we call the CCIP. Internally, expenses are tracked through our Munis system, and we can run reports to verify that proper procedures are followed there. And I will tell you that we absolutely appreciate the collaboration that we've already had, certainly with the Treasurer's Office, but also with Internal Auditor O'Connor. Kevin has been terrific about sharing any resources, information that he receives during continuing education sessions that are sponsored by the Auditor of State that bring clarity to what they identify as potential risks and future scope of review that, as I said, we anticipate and are already planning for. So I would say, in addition to those risks that we've named, the changing expectation of outside reviewers, I think, is always a risk. But quite honestly, it's a pandemic. We are leading in a time of pandemic. And so a risk is that the plans will need to be adjusted. We don't have a timeline. If I knew right now that we needed strategies for the next 6 months, we would have a pretty good idea of what we needed to do. The fact that we don't know exactly when PPE and plexiglass and social distancing, those things, how long that's going to be necessary, means that we will, and we say publicly, we will continue to adjust our plan as needed. Now, having said that, we certainly have a plan, and we will stick to the allowable areas, but this is a pandemic. So we very much appreciate the additional funding, but it's a pandemic.
Yes, ma'am, and that is very well said, Ms. Mosier, and I did most definitely appreciate your report at FAC and the specificity of it regarding the funding and the state fundings and the timeline with which we're looking to apply for some of those funds and what they were meant to be used for. It really did allow for me to take the information that you gave us at FAC and go back to the administration and ask some very specific questions, to which Dr. Dixon then replied back openly to the Board of Education as well as to the general public at the next board meeting. And so it was a very seamless process, and I love it when I'm able to use the work that you all and your teams have done during committee and giving us, that information, and then go back and allow for Dr. Dixon and her team to then articulate all of that information to the public when we have all of those eyeballs and ears on us. I know oftentimes you may think, well, why is he asking that? I know he's got the report and all of that, but that does not necessarily mean that the general public understands what it is that we're talking about or has access to that information. And sometimes it benefits us when we're looking at being as transparent as we can be to those parents and other stakeholders within the community. When we're able to get information like you all have given to us today, and then articulate that back in real time, what that really means for young people and what that really means for our staff. All of this stuff is very, very helpful. And so thank you, Mr. Pahoric. Thank you, Ms. Mosier, for this report, and Maurice and your team as well. I want to make sure that before we move to Dr. Dixon, that we don't have any questions for either Ms. Mosier or for Mr. Pahoric. So members of the committee. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move forward. Really exciting day in Columbus City Schools today. And Dr. Dixon, I am not going to steal your thunder, ma'am. I'm just going to turn the floor over to you to say what it is that many folks have been waiting to hear for quite some time, since really about a year ago. So please move forward, Dr. Dixon. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. So we announced earlier today, we sent notifications out to our stakeholders, and a memo went out to our families around 2:00 that our 6 to 12 grade students will begin to return back in a blended model beginning March 15th. So March 15th, we're going to bring in all of our 6th graders. They're going to come into their buildings, and our 11th and 12th graders. And we wanted to bring our 6th graders in by themselves because it will be it's a big transition year for them. They've never been in middle school before, many of them, except for the ones that are in K-6 schools or K-8 schools. And then the following week, we will return students in grades 7, 8, 9, and 10. So this has been, long overdue for many students and some of the families who have been waiting for us to bring our other students back. But as we've talked about in this meeting today, there's a lot of risk, and we have to make sure that we bring our students back and bring them back safely. So for us, it may not be as timely as some people wanted it. However, we understand that we are ready, and we are providing alternatives for those families and students who just don't want to come back into their buildings. We're opening a window for 2 weeks for them to transfer to the digital academy, just in case. And so, we have about 10, 11 weeks left of school. Can you believe that? School is almost at the end. But we are excited to be able to bring some more students back. We have over 24,000 students in now. And so this is their 4th week for our kindergarten with pre-K through 5. And so many families have been asking where the middle school students and our high school students will be back. So that's a big announcement for us today. And we are ready, and we are excited for our teachers and our students to finally be engaged in person, even if it's only 2 days a week. And as you know, we have work with Columbus Public Health to get as many of our staff members vaccinated who wanted it. So we have almost a little over half of our 9,000 staff members who have received a first dose, and we're beginning to see people get the second dose. So that's promising that we had that opportunity to provide for our staff, just another layer of protection for them, even though we do not require our staff members to be vaccinated. It is their choice, but that option was available to all of our staff members. So excited that this day is finally coming, March 15th. And thank you for your support. Thank you for all these questions about risk. We want to make sure, Kevin and your team, that we're bringing students in and we're bringing them in safely. And we have those strategies that are clear and outlined. And so right now our teams, we have Dr. Stanford is leading teams with our union leaders and others that are doing building checks of our secondary spaces, just to going through with those checklists and making sure that we have those buildings. They will be ready, but we just want to make sure we cross all our T's and dot our I's. So thank you, Mr. Ragland, for allowing me to have that announcement tonight.
Yes, ma'am. No problem at all. And thank you so much for all the hard work you and your team have been doing. I am proud of the work that we have done throughout this entire pandemic. This is very, very difficult. It's only exacerbated by the fact that we are the largest school district in the state of Ohio. And so with this being new, there are no previous things for us to look at to see what to do and what not to do. And so on a lot of levels, we were planning and going and reacting and doing things as we turned over rocks and found out something else. And you all have done a very good job in navigating this entire thing. And so I'm really, really excited about today's announcement. One thing, and I know we've got a board meeting coming up next week. The one thing that I know that you have been working very diligently throughout the year on Digital Academy. And for those families that are looking at Digital Academy as an option, I would hope that at your report on Tuesday, that you'd be able to talk a little bit about some of the upgrades that we've made to Digital Academy and some of the things that we have done. That would be really, really good to update our public on so that they can see really what's going on and the great things that are happening with our Digital Academy. I think that'd be really good. So before we go ahead and sign off, are there other questions, brief questions for Dr. Dixon? I see my co-chair is chomping. Okay, that's a no. I saw your hand and I thought you were waving. Okay, Madam Beckerly. Okay, thank you. Other members of the committee that might have other questions. Okay, I got a thumbs up there. All right, absolutely. Okay, well, Dr. Dixon and everyone who has presented
No, I
today,
think you had some questions, James.
Okay,
I was just gonna say-
I'm not saying, I'm sorry, please move forward.
Just saying, Dr. Dixon, congratulations. It's great news. And for all the team, thanks for all you've done. It's some heavy lifting. We've been through it. There's a lot to do and the students will all appreciate it. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Kevin, do you have your?
I wanted to also congratulate you. Appreciate working with your team and and moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And it's been a team effort. So everyone has worked so hard and, you know, each of us have a certain part to play. And it's just refreshing when it all aligns. And as someone stated, as board member Ragland said, there is no blueprint.
No.
And I think sometimes people think that we have all the answers and we are, you know, we learned some things, just like we've announced graduation, that we're going to have in-person graduations in large venues, but we learned a lot from the graduations that took place in the spring, even though we did an all virtual graduation. So there's some things that we are learning from other districts, but there's no blueprint and we are taking our times. Even though, you know, there's criticism, and I'm glad, as Catherine stated, this is a pandemic. So we keep reminding ourselves that we have to make the best decision given the information at the time that we've made that decision. And I believe that we've made, you know, good decisions thus far, and we're just going to keep moving at the pace that we believe is appropriate for our district and our community. Because you can't compromise safety. Safety is important. And if it takes us a little longer to get there, we will, but we will get there safely.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Right.
So thank you.
Thank you. All right, members of the committee, thank you for your service today and always throughout the entire pandemic. The date of our next meeting is going to be March 25th. 2021. We're going to start at 3:30. That will also be a hybrid meeting. So looking forward to seeing all of your lovely faces next month. At this time, I will entertain.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. I had one thing I wanted to mention.
Yes, sir, please.
Ms. Smith wanted me to make sure I thanked our communication staff and IT staff just for the work they do to make these meetings a success, especially with this hybrid meeting. It went really well. So specifically, Scott Wortman, Paul Brown, and Tyler Scott, thanks so much for all the work that you guys do.
Yeah, and if appropriate for the next meeting, if the outside folks, if we're able to attend in person, just please update the meeting invite, and I'd be glad to attend in person.
Yeah, good.
Certainly, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. All right, thank you all. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. O'Connor?
All righty. Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Vajon?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Great job.
Appreciate it.
Have a good night. Stay safe.